Serious, what are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public? Toy box killer transcript. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Dude and his wife kidnapped young girls for his sex dungeon and played this tape for them when they woke up, detailing what he was going to do to them, including torture, raped by his dog, and how he doesn't get caught by brainwashing them to forget. I read this about a year ago. I'm still trying to forget it. That dude was fucked. Find this link in the video description. Methods of reported torture that author Douglas Valentine wrote were used at the interrogation centers included rape, gang rape, rape using eels, snakes. Military Intelligence Officer K. Barton Osborne reports that he witnessed the following use of torture: the use of the insertion of a 6-inch dowel into the canal of one of my detainees' ears, and the tapping through the brain until dead. This one was the worst to me. I just had a whole new nightmare scenario added to the top of my list. I think the most important thing to come out of the recently redacted Kennedy files is verifiable proof that Ruby knew Oswald before the assassination. That's been debated / covered up for decades. Sweden had a compulsory sterilization program. Find this link in the video description. Running from 1935 to 1979. It was state sanctioned and given without consent, sometimes without the people knowing they were being sterilized. The three main reasons for these sterilizations were 1. Health concerns for the mother. 2. Eugenic, not wanting to pass on mental illnesses or any form of handicap. 3. Social, antisocial people, criminals, drunks, etc. In other words, anyone who didn't conform properly and was considered unfit to raise children. Yeah, and in their mania, they sterilized girls for being promiscuous just because they were social, or a girl who was deemed dumb when she was actually short-sighted and couldn't read the blackboard properly. It was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape and pillage with the sanction and bidding of the all-highest, George Hunter White, who oversaw drug experiments for the CIA as part of Operation Midnight Climax? Find this link in the video description. One of the children was filmed numerous times performing sexual acts with high-ranking federal government officials, in a scheme set up by Cameron and other cultural researchers, to blackmail the officials, to ensure further funding for the experiments. Operation Sea Spray. Find this link in the video description. The military sprayed supposedly harmless bacteria over San Francisco to study the spread of biological weapon attacks. It was revealed that this happened over 200 times all across the US. You have to be fucking kidding me. In 1981, Nevin's surviving family members filed suit against the federal government, alleging negligence. My grandfather wouldn't have died except for that, and it left my grandmother to go broke trying to pay his medical bills, says Mr. Nevin's grandson, Edward J. Nevin III, a San Francisco attorney who filed the case in U.S. District Court. The lower court ruled that the government was immune from lawsuits. The Nevin family appealed the suit all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which declined to overturn lower court judgments. Yup. Despite the fact that the agents they used were supposedly harmless and had no conclusive link to any deaths or illnesses, the courts decided that that wasn't the reason they should dismiss the case. Instead, they set a precedent for blanket immunity for the US federal government. I was pretty shocked to not find this mentioned anywhere else on the thread. Not really classified, but very creepy. The business plot of 1933. The wealthiest businessmen of America, like the names you see on banks and buildings in America today, allegedly formed a plot to overthrow President FDR and install a military leader in his place. Their choice was a U.S. Marine general named Smedley Butler, as he was a decorated leader of the highest rank. Butler, a loyal patriot, played along until they were seriously about to attempt to collapse the U.S. economy by holding the financial stability of the country hostage. He rolled on them and testified to Congress about the planned coup. No one was prosecuted. General Smedley Butler may be the reason the world does not, officially, have a society like the United Corporations of Rockefeller, Morgan and Chase. Source: had an activist U.S. Gov professor. You miss one of the most interesting points. Dubai's great-grandpappy, Bush Assad's dad granddaddy, was allegedly in on it. I remember a US government-funded project that involved teaching dolphins how to talk that ended up with 2 female scientists giving them hand jobs. What did they expect dolphins to say? Thanks for the handy. Been a while since I got an old-fashioned. Not exactly creepy. But, Operation Success. Find this link in the video description. The CIA backed coup in Guatemala at the behest of the United Fruit Company and US State Department. The official CIA history of the operation is truly one of the most fucked up things I've ever read. It was also the blueprint for the Bay of Pigs and other CIA interventions around the world. TL, Doctor? How about Nixon's undelivered speech announcing that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were stranded alive on the moon with no hope of rescue? Find this link in the video description. This was made just in case this happened, right? Yeah, I assume they figured the speech could be adapted to other scenarios, but wanted a starting point prepared ahead of time. Jeffrey Dahmer's full confession, a couple of 100 pages of pure madness, necrophilia, dismemberment, skinning, lobotomy, body part preservation, cannibalism. Dahmer became pretty close to his interrogating detectives, Dennis Murphy and Patrick Kennedy, and provided a lot of detail to them, a lot of it in a pretty candid, offhand manner. It's incredibly hard to find Dahmer's confession online without it being behind a paywall, but it is in the public domain, so I've provided link to the PDF downloads. The first 63 pages are mainly forms and letters. The real meat of the confession starts afterwards. Part 1. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Part 2. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Never forget that the local PD returned to Dahmer a naked, beaten, crying, bleeding minor boy that had escaped Dahmer's grasp. Also, despite two women who found him protesting and pleading with the officers to save his life, the officers were reinstated too. Why wouldn't they do anything? The CIA was working on a heart attack gun back in the 1960s-70s. It started off as a conspiracy theory, but gained enough momentum nationwide that it forced the US government's hand and they finally admitted the theory was mostly accurate. Short version, they never had a fully functional heart attack gun, but they did have a nearly working prototype. The idea was that it would have a very small projectile that would be laced with a chemical that would induce a heart attack and leave a hole smaller than one left behind by a syringe. While they never had a fully working version, they did have a prototype, but abandoned the project once they more or less had to admit the conspiracy was mostly true. I find this to be among the creepiest/scariest things declassified by the government simply because of the consequences of them admitting to having been working on such a weapon. For one, it shows that the US government was very serious, at least at one point in time, about being able to take someone out with it being easily traced back to them. Whether they would have used this on private US citizens or on foreign agents is debatable, but they easily could have used it to silence people who were pushing to further advance civil rights or people who generally spoke out against the government in general. It's also scary because it makes you stop and think how many conspiracy theories are correct or at least scarily close to being correct. Disclaimer: I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I do find them interesting and tend to read up about them, but have never bought into very many of them. I mostly just find them interesting. If they were working on it that far back, they probably have something working by now, or the tech was rolled into another project at least. We can't even dream just what the US intelligence/military is truly capable of. They've had trillions every year for decades and we see very little of what comes from all that R&D. It's really scary to think about just how far ahead their tech really is. I agree. Whenever a project ends and becomes declassified, it is simply that form and name of the project. The actual research and develop taking place and data being collected continues and simply gets renamed under other classified means. Definitely the Jonestown death tape. That shit proves to be a solid way to lose all chances of sleep. So, here's some context. Jim Jones started a cult called the People's Temple, yes, without the apostrophe, and eventually they moved to a new settlement they built in Guyana called Jonestown, named after their leader, since he made them believe he was some form of the Messiah, as a lot of cult leaders did. He could control them all to do whatever he pleases, and one of the things they did was practice drinking Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid as commonly believed, to prepare themselves for the time when they commit revolutionary suicide. These practices were just normal Flavor Aid/Kool-Aid, but Jones told them it was poison just to see their reactions. When the time came, someone recorded what was, essentially, the sounds of people drinking Flavor Aid laced with cyanide, alongside a fatal cocktail of other substances. Many victims including young children, which you could hear screaming in the audio. 900 or so people died, only a few didn't. This was the biggest loss of American life in a deliberate act until 9/11. And there is an audio recording of it. And just a very strong reminder, this wasn't mass suicide. This was mass murder. Many people were willing to die at his hands. But all the children and some of the adults didn't. Since all of them were forced to take the drink. It wasn't their own choice to drink it. It was Jones's. So, whilst people believe that it was a suicide, they were all duped into being murdered by Jim Jones. There was a documentary released this past February, Jonestown, The Women Behind the Massacre. Super interesting and I highly recommend it. Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, is also working on a miniseries for HBO on Jonestown, so that would be good to see as well. A little different than what most people are posting, but I find black box recordings from plane crashes to be extremely creepy/disturbing. Many of them are never released publicly, but some are. You get to hear how people react in their final seconds when they realize they are going to die. I love you, Ma. Find this link in the video description. I've read that the absolute most common last word on flight recorders around the world is shit, or local equivalent. Operation Northwoods. Find this link in the video description. Basically, the US government was going to carry out attacks its own people, as well as other military targets, and blame it on the Cuban government, so that the US would have a justified reason for going to war with Cuba. The plan involved blowing up US ships and even inciting acts of terrorism on the streets of America, killing civilians. It was backed by the Duty and Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thankfully, John Kennedy vetoed the idea. According to Adam Walensky, JFK's speechwriter and friend at the time, JFK left the meeting and said, "And we call ourselves the human race." The military leadership under JFK was basically insane. Read about the Air Force Chief of Staff and his virtually open and blatant insubordination to JFK. Makes the mistakes in Vietnam seem like a foregone conclusion. Not so much creepy, but rather pretty freaking cool in a 50s sci-fi B-movie kind of way. Project 1794. Find this link in the video description. Top secret program with the US Air Force working with a Canadian aeronautics company to build a supersonic flying saucer-like aircraft that would be able to simultaneously wage psychological war on our Cold War enemies as well as physical war. It was also designed to be a bomber. The project was scrapped when they figured out that not only would it be too expensive to build enormous flying discs, but also that crafts of that shape were near impossible to fly at supersonic speed. I'm pretty sure a lot of UFO conspiracies were started by their smaller test flight models. Area 51 has something to do with aerospace engineering, if I remember correctly. Wouldn't be surprised if they tested some prototypes there. Not sure if it's declassified, but the case of Hisashi Aochi. He was a Japanese nuclear plant worker who was exposed to a lot of radiation which left him looking like a fallout gal. They kept him alive for 3 months, even though he was in a lot of pain. His heart even stopped 3 times in an hour, but they kept on resuscitating him. I don't know much about it, but it is interesting to read about. Says when his heart failed the last time they didn't bring him back, because his family wanted him to have a peaceful death. There's nothing peaceful about the incredible amount of pain and suffering he was subjected to. His overall treatment was absolutely horrifying, but I somehow doubt he was conscious by the time his heart started stopping. Not really creepy but more weird. The Pentagon commissioned an initiative called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Find this link in the video description. And they recently just released footage of US military aircraft approaching these advanced aerospace threats. I mean, what the hell are these guys doing? Find this link in the video description. When we almost blew up North Carolina with a nuclear bomb. After the My Lai massacre, killing of around 400 to 500 innocent civilians in Vietnam after an army troop killed an entire village, the US government established a group to investigate other war crimes like this occurring in Vietnam, the Vietnam War Crimes Working Group. They found 28 massacres of equal or greater magnitude than My Lai that the public was unaware of, so literally thousands of innocent people killed by U.S. soldiers. The information has since been reclassified, but there were several journal articles on it when it was first released. Not sure if it's creepy, but certainly disturbing. Ike, the officer, William Kelly, responsible for My Lai, had a sentence of only 3 years for murdering over 20 people. He's still alive today. It's fucked. He was actually a hero in the eyes of the American public at the time. Jimmy Carter even led a campaign to pardon Kelly. Contrarily, Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot who essentially ended the incident, was demonized 4 years after. The infamous Tuskegee syphilis study. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, also known as the Tuskegee syphilis study or Tuskegee syphilis experiment //sky/. Find this link in the video description. /T/the. Find this link in the video description. //1/. Find this link in the video description. Was an infamous clinical study. Find this link in the video description. Conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the U.S. Public Health Service. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. The purpose of this study was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis. Find this link in the video description. In rural African/American men in Alabama under the guise of receiving free health care from the United States government. /1/. Find this link in the video description. The study was conducted to understand the disease's natural history throughout time and to also determine proper treatment dosage for specific people and the best time to receive injections of treatments. /2/. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. The Public Health Service started working on this study in 1932 in collaboration with Tuskegee University. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket, a historically black college. Find this link in the video description. In Alabama, investigators enrolled in the study a total of 622 impoverished African/American sharecroppers. Find this link in the video description. From Macon County. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket, Alabama. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Of these men, 431 had previously contracted syphilis before the study began, and 169 left square bracket / 3 /. Find this link in the video description. Did not have the disease. The men were given free medical care, meals, and free burial insurance for participating in the study. The men were told that the study was only going to last 6 months, but it actually lasted 40 years, /4 /. Find this link in the video description. After funding for treatment was lost, the study was continued without informing the men that they would never be treated. None of the men infected were ever told that they had the disease, and none were treated with penicillin. Find this link in the video description. Even after the antibiotic was proven to successfully treat syphilis, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Find this link in the video description. Closed bracket, the men were told that they were being treated for bad blood, a colloquialism that described various conditions such as syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. Bad blood, specifically the collection of illnesses the term included, was a leading cause of death within the Southern African/American community. /4 /. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Find this link in the video description. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. To gain ethical certification for human subjects experimentation in the psych field, and certainly others, though I'm a psych student, so I wouldn't know, you have to answer questions on this exact study. It's a huge failure in the tenets of ethics that we should strive to follow in research. Many people cite the research that the Nazis did as truly horrifying, and while this is absolutely the case, they tend to overlook what was going on in America at the time, and long afterwards. 2. If people are interested in ethical research, look up the Belmont Report. Don't forget the forced sterilization of Americans deemed unworthy of reproduction, including people that had nothing wrong with them, and the Stanford prison experiment, although that was ultimately stopped. A man named Joseph McMoneagle claimed he had the unusual talent known as remote viewing, where he had the ability to see the world through another person's eyes at any physical place, and any place in time. The CIA ran a test on him in 1984 where they tried to discredit his ability. They gave him a piece of paper with coordinates and a date and time written on it, and told him to tell them what he saw. The catch was the coordinates were on Mars and the date was 1,000,000 years in the past. However, to their surprise, when McMoneagle began to describe what he saw, he described an unfamiliar landscape, and said that he viewed a civilization in dire state. He then went on to describe complex infrastructure spanning the strange landscape, such as roads, aqueducts, channels and pyramids. He described the entities that he saw as tall shadowed figures, and it appeared that their situation was critical, and on the brink of apocalypse. The CIA declassified the entire transcript, which can be read by anyone online. Find this link in the video description. So is r/writing prompts a CIA operation to try and locate psychics. Unit 731 is completely fucked. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Jesus Christ, they removed their stomachs and attached the esophagus to the intestines, amputated arms and reattached them, froze people's limbs then thawed them out. Just some crazy man. Albert Fish was a serial killer based in New York. He claims to have murdered 100 plus children, but was convicted and executed for 5. He wrote a letter to the mother of a 10-year-old girl that he cannibalized in 1928. The letter is one of the most demented things I have ever read. Find this link in the video description. He also used to shove needles into his body, mostly through the taint. Find this link in the video description. The needles in his dick hole actually shorted out the electric chair. A few years ago someone dumped a bunch of FOIA documents outlining a lawsuit between an environmental lawyer and Sandia National Labs, and their dump of radioactive waste into Albuquerque's aquifer. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. In the 1940s a Swedish group of scientists gave mentally ill patients candy to see the effects it would have on their teeth. What makes it especially bad is that these experiments were performed on people who were unreducible, who had no say in what went on, and needless to say their teeth were beyond repair. Source. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Once again in the 1940s, the US government, in an attempt to study the effects radiation had on newborns and pregnant women, gave doses of radiation to newborns and pregnant women. In one study, researchers gave pregnant women doses of iodine 131. When they inevitably miscarried, they studied the women's aborted embryos in an attempt to discover at what stage, and to what extent, radioactive iodine crosses a placental barrier. Link. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Pregnant children. Hopefully a typo. Extra creepy if not. Yeah, it's a typo, need to correct. Thanks. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and Department of Defense have long histories of involvement with Hollywood media, from sponsorships and to direct consultations. Alford, 2017. Redmond, 2017. A declassified memo titled "The Motion Picture as a Weapon of Psychological Warfare" from the CIA's precursor, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, 1947, stated its main objective was to exploit the potentialities of the motion picture as a weapon of psychological warfare for the United States. P. 1. It went on to detail potentialities relating to influencing thoughts, behaviors and attitudes, providing extensive recommendations to coordinate with the film industry in the interest of psychological warfare. OSS, 1947. P. 11. They're doing the same thing with social media like Facebook now for sure. My favorite is just Google Cocaine Importation Agency. That's right kids. The CIA was one of the largest drug smuggling operations in the world. Gary Webb, Kill the Messenger, broke the story for the San Jose Mercury News. Freeway Ricky Ross built a crack empire out of the stuff, which was used to fund the Nicaraguan Contras after Congress cut off funding. When he got busted he tried to rat out his suppliers, but they were being released by the D. Find this link in the video description. They recently made a movie about that. American made. The Senate Intelligence Committee report on torture. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. This is one of a couple things that I really dislike Obama for. He said we should look forward, not backward, regarding our government committing torture, and whether we should prosecute the people responsible or not. Here are some of the public findings from the report. Find this link in the video description. Close bracket. Examples of torture and abuse of prisoners. The CIA had force-fed some prisoners orally and or anally in order to establish total control over the detainee. The committee found that at least 5 CIA detainees were subjected to rectal rehydration or rectal feeding without documented medical necessity. At least 1 prisoner was diagnosed with chronic hemorrhoids, an anal fissure and symptomatic rectal prolapse, symptoms normally associated with a violent rape. CIA officials Scott Miller and James Pavitt were told that rectal exams of at least 2 prisoners had been conducted with excessive force. Threats were made to rape and murder children and or family members of prisoners. In November 2002 the CIA killed at least 1 prisoner during interrogation by hypothermia. No CIA employees were disciplined as a result of his death. At least 4 prisoners with injuries to their legs, 2 with broken feet, 1 with a sprained ankle, and 1 with an amputated leg, were forced to stand on their injuries. Prisoners were told that they would be killed. For example, 1 prisoner was told, "We can never let the world know what I have done to you." Another was told that the only way he would be allowed to leave the prison would be in a coffin. One CIA interrogator who was subsequently sent home early threatened a prisoner with a gun and power drill, and played Russian roulette with him. At least 2 prisoners were victims of mock executions. Several prisoners almost died, and became completely unresponsive or nearly drowned during waterboarding. Abu Zubaydah was so badly damaged during his time in prison, that it was surgically removed. Prisoners were kept awake for over 1 week, 180 hours, causing at least 5 to experience disturbing hallucinations. One prisoner was psychologically traumatized to the point of being a broken man, but CIA operatives stopped short of complete breaking him. Prisoners were forced to use buckets for. Find this link in the video description. Punishment. The waste bucket could be removed from a prisoner's cell. What's funny is that when training for proper interrogations they tell you endlessly that torture does not provide usable intelligence. Torture is how you get to hear what you want, not the truth. If I'm smashing your toes with a hammer, pulling out fingernails, or caning the bottoms of your feet, you are going to tell me exactly what you think I want to hear, whether it is true or not. The CIA, by all accounts I've read in declassified stuff and anecdotal accounts online, is always looking for a quick easy, for them, not the subject, way to extract information that supports their theories instead of ways to get at the truth. That's just shitty practices. Coffee, cigarettes, and conversation can pull out a lot more actionable intelligence than all the torture in the world. The CIA, by all accounts I've read in declassified stuff and anecdotal accounts online, is always looking for a quick easy, for them, not the subject, way to extract information that supports their theories instead of ways to get at the truth. That's just shitty practices. TBH, it sounds to me like they just get a kick out of torture. The Snowden documents. Why is it the most fucked up? Because nothing came of it. People are still being spied on today, and it's not even seen as that bad. That's why it's fucked up.